Welcome to this quiet space where the world slows down and the mind finds rest. Tonight, we journey together into the mountains where ancient stories wait in the stillness. Stories of gratitude whispered on the wind. Stories that carry the gentleness of monks and wanderers who walked these paths long ago. There is nowhere you need to be, nothing you need to do. Only this moment, soft and welcoming. Let your body settle into comfort. Let your breath move gently, without effort. The weight of the day can fall away now, like leaves drifting from branches. Tonight, we'll walk together through mountain villages and temple courtyards, where simple acts of thankfulness shine like lanterns in the dark. These are not lessons, but quiet reflections. Small moments that remind us of the beauty already here. So close your eyes if you wish. Let the softness of these words carry you. There is no rush, only the slow unfolding of stories beneath the stars. And now, our journey begins. High in the mountains, where the air grows thin and the sky stretches wide and clear, there was a monastery so old that even the stones had forgotten their own beginning. The walls were made of gray rock, smooth from centuries of wind and rain, and the roof tiles curved like the backs of sleeping dragons. Prayer flags hung from the eaves, faded by sun and weather, their colors soft as memory. Red, blue, yellow, green, white. They whispered in the breeze, a constant gentle flutter that had been the monastery's song for longer than anyone could say. The path that led to this place wound through forests of pine and cedar, climbing steadily upward. In spring, wildflowers bloomed between the stones. In winter, snow covered everything in silence. But in autumn, when our story takes place, the world was painted in shades of amber and rust. The leaves of the ginkgo trees turned gold, and they fell slowly, one by one, like small acts of letting go. It was on such an autumn evening that a young monk named Tenzin walked this path. He had been sent from the monastery down the mountain to collect herbs from a distant valley, and now he was returning. His feet moved steadily over the familiar stones. He wore simple robes of deep maroon, and over his shoulder hung a cloth bag filled with dried roots and leaves. Medicinal plants for the monastery's small infirmary, ginger and ginseng, licorice root, and dried chrysanthemum flowers. The sun was beginning to set. The light came through the trees in long golden beams, illuminating the dust and pollen that drifted through the air. Everything glowed. The bark of the trees, the stones beneath his feet, even the air itself seemed made of light. Tenzin walked slowly. There was no need to hurry. The monastery would still be there when he arrived. The evening meal would be simple, as it always was: rice and vegetables, perhaps some miso soup. The other monks would be finishing their meditation in the main hall, sitting in rows on worn cushions, their breath rising and falling in the quiet. As he walked, Tenzin noticed the way the wind moved through the valley below. It stirred the tops of the trees, making them sway like waves on an ocean. He noticed the coolness of the air on his face, the way his breath made small clouds in the fading light. He noticed the weight of the bag on his shoulder and the way his body had adjusted to it over the long day of walking. He noticed, and he felt grateful, not for anything grand or extraordinary, just for this: the walking, the breathing, the light on the stones. The path curved around a large boulder, smooth and gray, covered in pale green lichen. Tenzin had passed this boulder 1,000 times, 10,000 times perhaps. He knew its shape the way he knew his own hands. But tonight, Something caught his attention. There, in a small crevice near the base of the boulder, a tiny plant was growing. It was no bigger than his thumb. Delicate green leaves, each one perfectly formed, emerging from a crack in the stone where no soil should be, where nothing should be able to grow. Tenzin stopped. He set down his bag carefully and knelt beside the boulder. His knees pressed into the cool earth. He leaned closer, studying the small plant. Its leaves were a vibrant green, almost luminous in the fading light. They were slightly fuzzy, covered in fine hairs that caught the last rays of the sun. The stem was thin but strong, rising from the tiniest pocket of soil that had collected in the crack over who knows how many seasons. How had it found its way here? A seed carried by the wind, perhaps, or dropped by a passing bird. It had landed in this impossible place, this narrow crack in solid stone, and somehow it had decided to grow. Tenzin sat back on his heels. He looked at the plant for a long time. Minutes passed. The shadows grew longer. The golden light softened to amber, then to rose. Still he sat, watching this small green life that had taken root in stone. He thought about all the conditions that had to be just right for this plant to exist. The seed had to land in exactly this spot. Rain had to fall, collecting in the crevice. Enough soil had to accumulate, grain by grain, season after season. The temperature had to be neither too hot nor too cold. The boulder had to face the right direction to catch enough sun. So many conditions, so many things that could have gone wrong. And yet here it was, growing, thriving, even in its small way. Tenzin felt something open in his chest, a warmth, a softness. He had been walking this path thinking of nothing in particular, his mind occupied with small concerns. Whether he had gathered enough herbs, whether the elder monks would approve of his choices, whether his meditation practice was progressing as it should. But this tiny plant growing in stone had no such concerns. It simply grew, it simply was, and in being, it was complete. He reached out, very gently, and touched one of the leaves with the tip of his finger. It was cool and slightly damp with evening dew. The leaf bent beneath his touch, then sprang back when he withdrew his hand. "Thank you," he thought, though he wasn't sure what he was thanking or why. Just thank you. He stood slowly, his knees stiff from kneeling. He picked up his bag and adjusted it on his shoulder. The monastery was not far now, perhaps another 20 minutes of walking, but he felt different than he had before he stopped. Lighter, more awake. The path continued upward, winding through the last stretch of forest before opening onto the meadow where the monastery stood. Tenzin walked with attention now. He noticed everything. The way a spider's web stretched between two branches, nearly invisible except where the light caught it. The sound of a stream somewhere below, its voice rising through the trees. The smell of wood smoke, faint but growing stronger. Someone at the monastery had lit the fire in the main hall. When he emerged from the forest, the meadow spread before him. The grass was golden in the last light. The monastery sat at the far edge, its gray walls solid and calm against the darkening sky. Smoke rose from the kitchen chimney, a thin white line ascending straight up in the still air. Tenzin crossed the meadow. His feet moved through the grass, which whispered softly with each step. He reached the monastery gate and pushed it open. The old wood creaked, a familiar sound that meant home. He crossed the courtyard, where a few monks were sweeping the stones with straw brooms, their movements slow and deliberate. They nodded to him in greeting, and he nodded back. He went to the herb room, a small building near the kitchen, and unpacked his bag. He sorted the herbs carefully, laying them out on the wooden shelves where they would dry. Each root, each leaf, each flower, he handled them with care, grateful for what they would provide: medicine for the sick, tea for the weary. When he was finished, he went to his small room. It was simple: a sleeping mat on the floor, a low table, a single cushion, a window that looked out toward the mountains. He lit a candle and placed it on the table. The flame danced, casting soft shadows on the walls. He sat on the cushion and looked out the window. The sky was deepening to indigo. The first stars were appearing, small points of light in the vast darkness. He thought again of the tiny plant growing in the crack of the boulder, that small, persistent green life. And he thought, everything that is a gift. This breath, this body, this moment, even the stones beneath my feet, even the darkness gathering outside, all of it, a gift. He sat there for a long time, watching the stars emerge one by one. His breath slowed, his mind grew quiet, and in that quietness, he felt a deep, wordless gratitude for being alive, for being here, for being part of this vast, mysterious unfolding. Eventually, he lay down on his mat. He pulled a thin blanket over himself. The candle had burned low, its flame small and steady. He watched it for a moment, then closed his eyes. Outside, the wind moved through the prayer flags. Inside, the monastery settled into sleep, and Tenzin, thinking of a tiny plant growing in stone, drifted into dreams where everything was exactly as it should be. In another part of the mountains, where the slopes were gentler and the valleys wider, there was a village so small it had no name. Just a handful of houses built from wood and stone, their roofs weighted down with rocks to keep them from blowing away in the winter winds. The houses clustered together near a stream that flowed year-round, cold and clear, fed by snowmelt from the peaks above. In this village lived an old woman named May. She had lived in the same house for 60 years, since she was a young bride. Her husband had passed long ago. Her children had grown and moved to the cities in the valleys below. She lived alone now, but she was not lonely. She had her garden, she had her neighbors. She had the mountains that rose on all sides, familiar as old friends. May's house was the smallest in the village. One room, really, with a sleeping area separated by a thin curtain, a small kitchen with a wood stove, a door that opened onto a narrow porch where she kept her gardening tools and a chair for sitting on warm afternoons. The walls were thick, the windows small. In winter, she would stuff paper and cloth into the cracks to keep out the cold. It was late autumn now, and May was preparing for winter. Each day she worked in her garden, harvesting the last of the vegetables before the first hard frost: radishes and turnips, cabbage and winter squash. She pulled them from the earth, shook off the soil, and carried them inside to store in baskets and crates. On this particular morning, May woke before dawn, as she always did. The air was cold. Her breath made small clouds in the darkness of her room. She wrapped herself in a thick quilt and sat up on her sleeping mat. Her joints were stiff, her fingers swollen with age. It took her a moment to stand. She shuffled to the kitchen and lit a small fire in the stove. She filled a pot with water from the bucket by the door and set it to boil. While she waited, she pulled on her work clothes, layers of patched shirts and trousers, a vest quilted from scraps of old fabric, Thick wool socks that had been darned so many times the original knit was hard to see. When the water boiled, she made herself tea, just hot water poured over a few dried leaves. She had no sugar, no honey, just the leaves and the water. She held the cup in both hands, feeling the warmth seep into her fingers. She sipped slowly, letting the heat spread through her chest. The sky outside was beginning to lighten. Not sunrise yet, but that pale gray that comes before. The darkness thinning, the shapes of things becoming visible. May finished her tea and put on her shoes. They were old canvas shoes with rubber soles, worn thin and patched with scraps of leather. She tied them carefully, double knotting the laces. Then she took her basket, a wide, shallow thing woven from bamboo, and went outside. The air was sharp and cold. The grass was wet with dew. Everything smelled of earth and frost. May crossed her small yard and opened the gate to her garden. It was a modest plot, no bigger than the house itself, enclosed by a fence of stacked stones to keep out the deer. She stood at the edge of the garden for a moment, looking at what remained. Most of the plants were finished for the season. The tomato vines were brown and withered. The bean plants had dried to husks. But here and there, green still showed. The hardy winter vegetables, the things that could withstand frost and cold. May walked slowly along the rows. She moved carefully, mindful of her old knees. She knelt beside the radishes and began to pull them up, one by one. Each radish came out of the soil with a soft, tearing sound, its white root mottled with dirt, its green tops wilted but still clinging. She worked patiently. There was no rush. The sun was rising now, a pale disk climbing over the eastern ridge. Its light was thin and cool, more silver than gold. It touched the tops of the mountains first, then slowly descended into the valley. As she pulled the radishes, May noticed one that was different from the others. It was small, much smaller than its neighbors, no bigger than her thumb. Its root was pale and slightly crooked, as if it had grown around a stone. She almost left it in the ground, thinking it wasn't worth harvesting. But then she paused. She looked at it more closely. This small radish had struggled. That much was clear. It had been planted in poor soil, or perhaps its seed had been weak. While the others grew large and round, this one had remained small. And yet it had persisted. It had pushed its root down through the hard earth. It had sent up its leaves toward the sun. It had lived its small radish life as fully as it could. May felt something catch in her throat, a tightness, not sadness, exactly. Something else, recognition perhaps. She reached out and pulled the small radish from the ground. She brushed the soil from it gently, carefully, as if it were precious, and in that moment, it was. She turned it over in her hand, examining it. The root was firm despite its size. The skin was clean and white. It had not given up. It had grown as much as it was able. "Thank you," May whispered. Her voice was rough in the morning air, the first words she had spoken all day. "Thank you for growing. Thank you for being here." She placed the small radish in her basket with the others. She didn't set it aside. She didn't discard it. She placed it carefully, right in the center where she could see it. The work continued. She moved to the turnips next, then to the winter squash that sprawled at the far end of the garden. The sun climbed higher. The air warmed slightly, though it was still cold. Her fingers grew numb, but she kept working. Pull, brush, carry, pull, brush, carry. a rhythm as old as planting itself. By mid-morning, her basket was full. She carried it back to the house and set it on the porch. Then she returned to the garden to continue. There were still the cabbages, still the last of the carrots, still the work of cutting back the dead plants and clearing the beds for winter. But her mind kept returning to the small radish. She thought about it as she worked. This tiny thing that had tried so hard, that had done its best with what it was given. And wasn't that all any of them could do? Wasn't that enough? She thought about her own life, the years she had lived in this house, the seasons that had passed, one after another. Some years had been abundant. The garden had produced more than she could eat, and she had shared with neighbors. Other years had been hard, drought or early frost, or her own failing health. But each year, she had done what she could. She had planted, she had tended, she had harvested what grew. And now, in the autumn of her life, she was like that small radish, still here, still growing, in her way. Her body was not what it had been. Her strength was diminished. But she was still here, still living, still part of the world's unfolding. When the afternoon came, May finished her work. She carried her tools to the porch and cleaned them, brushed off the soil, wiped down the handles, put them in their place for the winter. Then she went inside and washed her hands in a basin of cold water. The water was so cold it hurt. Her fingers were red and chapped. She dried them on a cloth and rubbed a little oil into the skin, working it in with slow circular motions. She took the basket of vegetables and began to sort them. The radishes in one crate, the turnips in another, the squash lined up along the wall. She worked methodically, handling each vegetable with care. And when she came to the small radish, she paused again. She held it up to the light from the window. Such a small thing, such a simple thing, and yet looking at it, she felt full, not of food, but of something else, a fullness in her chest, in her heart. She thought, I am grateful for this radish, for this garden, for this day of work, for these old hands that can still pull vegetables from the ground, for this small house that keeps me warm, for the mountains that surround me, for the water in the stream, for the air I breathe. She thought, I have so little, and yet I have everything. She placed the small radish on her windowsill, where it caught the afternoon light. She would eat it tonight, she decided. She would slice it thin and add it to her rice. She would taste its sharpness, its crisp freshness, and she would remember. As the day faded and evening came, May made her simple meal. She boiled rice in a pot on the stove. She sliced the small radish, thin as paper, and arranged the slices on a plate. She poured herself more tea. Then she sat at her small table and ate slowly, chewing each bite with attention. The radish was peppery and bright. It was perfect. Outside, the light drained from the sky. The mountains turned dark. Stars began to appear, scattered across the vast darkness like seeds. May finished her meal and washed her bowl and plate. She banked the fire in the stove so it would burn slowly through the night. Then she lay down on her sleeping mat and pulled her quilts over herself. She was tired. Her body ached from the day's work. But it was a good ache, the ache of a day lived fully. She closed her eyes. In the darkness of her room, she could still see the small radish in her mind, growing in hard soil, pushing toward the sun, doing its best with what it had been given. And she thought, tomorrow I will wake again, tomorrow I will work again, and whatever comes, it will be enough. She drifted then into sleep. Her breathing slowed and deepened. The house settled around her, its old wood creaking softly. And in her dreams, she walked through a garden where everything grew exactly as it should, where every plant, no matter how small, was perfect in its own way, where gratitude bloomed like flowers, filling the air with sweetness. Far to the east, where the mountains descended into rolling foothills covered in bamboo forests, there was a temple that few people knew about. It was not marked on any map. No signs pointed to it from the main roads. To reach it, one had to follow a narrow path that began at the edge of a village and wound upward through groves of bamboo so thick that even at midday the light was green and filtered. The temple itself was modest. A single hall with wooden pillars and a curved roof, a courtyard paved with flat stones, a well in one corner, its water cold and pure. Around the temple grew ancient trees, maples and ginkgos that had stood for centuries, their roots pushing up through the stones, their branches creating a canopy overhead. Only 3 monks lived at this temple. The eldest was called Brother Hui, and he had been there for 40 years. The other 2 were younger, students who had come to learn from him. They lived simply. They woke before dawn to meditate. They tended the small temple garden. They swept the courtyard. They rang the bell at sunset. Their days followed a rhythm as steady as breathing. Brother Hugh was old now. His back was bent from decades of sitting in meditation. His hair, what remained of it, was white as winter clouds. His face was deeply lined, each wrinkle a map of years lived with attention. He moved slowly, but his movements were precise, deliberate. There was no wasted motion, no hurry. On this particular morning, Brother Hui woke even earlier than usual. The sky was still fully dark, not even a hint of gray in the east. He rose from his sleeping mat and wrapped his robe around himself. The air was cold. Autumn was deepening toward winter. Soon the first snow would come. He left his small room and walked across the courtyard to the meditation hall. His feet were bare, as always. The stones were cold beneath them, but he had long ago learned not to mind the cold. He simply felt it. Coldness, nothing more. Inside the hall, he lit a single candle. The flame rose tall and straight in the still air. He placed a cushion on the floor and sat down, crossing his legs. His bones creaked. His knees protested. But he settled into the familiar posture, his spine straight, his hands resting in his lap. He closed his eyes and began to sit. The darkness inside was the same as the darkness outside, complete, soft. He let his breath come and go without controlling it. In, out, in, out. His mind was quiet but not empty. Thoughts arose, like small fish surfacing in a pond. He noticed them, let them pass. Time moved differently in meditation. Sometimes a few minutes felt like hours. Sometimes an hour passed in what seemed like moments. Brother Huey sat without measuring, without counting. He simply sat, present with whatever arose. Gradually, very gradually, the darkness began to thin. Not inside the hall remained dim, lit only by the single candle, but outside, beyond the open door, the sky was changing. Black to charcoal, charcoal to slate. The first birds began to sing, a few tentative notes, then more, then a chorus. Brother Hui opened his eyes. The candle had burned down halfway. He stood slowly, his knees cracking like dry twigs. He bowed to the altar at the front of the hall, then turned and walked outside. The courtyard was gray in the pre-dawn light. Everything was monochrome. Black, white, shades of gray between the stones, the trees, the wooden pillars of the hall. It was like looking at an ink painting, all subtle gradations of tone. Brother Hui walked to the well. There was a wooden bucket beside it, attached to a rope. He lowered the bucket into the darkness below. He heard the splash, felt the weight as the bucket filled. He hauled it up, hand over hand, the rope rough against his palms. The water was clear and cold, so cold it hurt his teeth when he drank. He scooped water in his cupped hands and splashed it on his face. The shock of cold woke him fully. He felt the water run down his cheeks, drip from his chin. He stood there for a moment, his hands still wet, and looked around the courtyard. Everything was waking. The birds were louder now. The sky was lighter. Soon the sun would rise. Soon his students would wake and join him for morning meditation. But for now, this moment was his alone. He noticed a small thing then. Something he had not noticed before, though he had stood at this well thousands of times, tens of thousands of times, perhaps. At the base of the well, where the stones met the ground, a tiny mushroom was growing. It was no bigger than his fingernail, pale cream in color, delicate as paper. It emerged from a crack between two stones, its cap perfectly round, its stem thin and fragile. Brother Hui knelt down to look at it more closely. His old knees protested, but he lowered himself carefully until he was at eye level with the mushroom. He leaned in close. He could see the tiny gills underneath the cap, fine as threads. He could see a dewdrop clinging to the edge, catching the growing light. How long had this mushroom been here? He must have walked past it yesterday, and the day before. Perhaps it had been here for days, and he had simply not noticed. Or perhaps it had grown overnight, pushing up through the dark soil with patient insistence. Either way, here it was now. Growing where almost nothing grew, in the shadowed space between stones, where feet passed constantly, where the ground was packed hard from 40 years of walking. Brother Hui felt something open in his chest, a spaciousness, a warmth. He had lived at this temple for so long. He knew every stone in the courtyard, every tree, every beam in the meditation hall. Or so he had thought, but here was something new, something he had never seen, a small mushroom that had appeared like a gift. He thought about all the conditions that had come together to allow this mushroom to grow. The spores that had drifted on the wind, the rain that had fallen 3 days ago, the shade provided by the well, the nutrients in the soil, accumulated grain by grain over years, the precise temperature, the exact amount of moisture, thousands of conditions, millions perhaps, all converging in this one moment to produce this one tiny mushroom. And he thought, this is true of everything, every breath, every moment, every life, all of it, the result of countless conditions coming together. Nothing exists by itself, nothing exists alone. Even him, especially him. He was here because his parents had lived, because his teacher had taught him, because farmers had grown the food he ate, because someone, long ago, had built this temple, because the sun rose each morning, because the earth turned, because the universe was exactly as it was. He was here because everything was here. Brother Hui sat back on his heels. He felt tears prick his eyes, though he could not have said why. Not sadness, not joy exactly. Something deeper. something that had no name. Gratitude, perhaps, though even that word seemed too small. He bowed to the mushroom, a full bow, his forehead touching the ground beside it. It was a gesture he usually reserved for the Buddha statue in the meditation hall. But this small mushroom, growing in impossible circumstances, was no less worthy of respect, no less worthy of reverence. When he straightened, the sun had just broken over the eastern ridge. The first rays of light spilled into the courtyard, turning everything gold. The stones, the trees, the water in the bucket, even the small mushroom, which suddenly seemed to glow with an inner light. Brother Hui stood slowly. His knees hurt, his back ached, but he felt light, lighter than he had in years. He heard footsteps behind him, his two students emerging from their rooms, ready for morning meditation. They bowed to him in greeting, and he bowed back. "Good morning, teacher," the younger one said. "Good morning," Brother Hui replied. His voice was soft, a little rough from not speaking since the night before. The students noticed something different in him, a brightness, a quality of presence, but they said nothing. They simply followed him into the meditation hall. The three of them sat together as the sun rose higher. They sat as they had sat 1,000 mornings before, but this morning was different. Brother Hui sat with the memory of the small mushroom glowing in his mind. He sat with gratitude for the mystery of existence, for the way life persists, for the way it finds a foothold even in the hardest places. When the sitting was finished, they rose and prepared breakfast. Simple food, rice porridge with pickled vegetables, tea. They ate in silence, as was their custom, but the silence felt different today, richer, more full. After breakfast, Brother Hui returned to the courtyard. The students began their daily tasks, one sweeping the meditation hall, the other tending the garden. Brother Hui stood by the well and looked at the small mushroom again. It was already beginning to wilt. By this afternoon, it would be gone. Mushrooms did not last long. They emerged, lived their brief lives, and disappeared. Like everything else. Like him. But while it was here, it was perfect, complete, lacking nothing. Brother Hui smiled. He took the broom that leaned against the wall and began to sweep the courtyard, carefully, mindfully, making sure not to disturb the tiny mushroom by the well. He swept in slow arcs, the bristles whispering against the stones. The sound was soothing, rhythmic. He thought, this sweeping, this breath, this moment, all of it, a gift. He thought, I have been given so much. The morning passed. The students completed their tasks and joined him in the courtyard. Together they worked in companionable silence, sweeping, raking leaves, carrying water, the simple maintenance of a life lived with attention. At midday, they ate again. Rice, soup, a few autumn vegetables from the garden, plain food, but nourishing. Brother Hui ate slowly, tasting each bite. He thought of the farmers who had grown this rice, the rain that had watered it, the sun that had ripened it, the hands that had harvested it, cooked it, brought it to his bowl. So many hands, so many conditions, all coming together in this single meal. After lunch, Brother Hui returned to his room. It was time for afternoon rest. He lay down on his mat and pulled a thin blanket over himself. The room was dim and quiet. Through the small window, he could see a branch of the ginkgo tree, its leaves brilliant yellow. He closed his eyes. His body was tired, but his mind was at peace. He thought once more of the small mushroom, growing between stones, holding nothing back, offering itself completely to the world. And he thought, This is how I want to live. This is how I want to be. Grateful for each moment, present with what is, holding nothing back. He drifted then into sleep, a light sleep, full of images. The courtyard, the well, the mushroom glowing in the morning sun, the faces of his students, the sound of the broom on stone. When he woke an hour later, the sun had moved across the sky. The light in his room had shifted. Everything was bathed in warm afternoon gold. He rose and returned to the courtyard. The small mushroom was still there, but barely. It had withered almost completely. Its cap collapsed, its color faded. By tomorrow, it would be gone. But that was all right. That was the way of things. Nothing lasted forever. Everything arose, persisted for a time, and passed away. To try to hold on would be futile. To resist change would be suffering. Better to simply appreciate, to bow in gratitude, to say thank you to each moment, knowing it would not come again. Brother Hui stood by the well as the afternoon light deepened. The shadows grew longer. The air grew cooler. Soon it would be time to ring the evening bell, time for evening meditation, time for the simple meal that would end the day. But for now, he simply stood, present, awake, grateful for everything, for the stones beneath his feet, for the water in the well, for the trees overhead, for the students in the hall, for the breath moving in and out of his lungs, for the small mushroom that had appeared like a teaching, reminding him of what he already knew but had momentarily forgotten, that everything is precious, that everything is fleeting, that everything is exactly as it should be. The sun touched the western mountains. The light turned amber, then rose, then violet. The first stars appeared. Brother Hui turned and walked slowly back to the meditation hall where his students were waiting. Together, they rang the bell. Its voice rolled out across the valley, deep and clear, announcing the day's end. And Brother Hui, listening to the sound fade into silence, felt once again that spaciousness in his chest, that gratitude without object, that love for the world exactly as it was. He bowed. They all bowed. And then they sat together in the gathering darkness, 3 monks in a small temple, surrounded by mountains, held by the earth, part of the great mystery that includes everything. In a village nestled between 2 mountain ranges, where the valley widened just enough for rice fields to be planted, there lived a woodworker named Chen. He was neither young nor old, somewhere in that middle stretch of life where the years blend together and one season feels much like another. He had a small workshop at the edge of the village, a wooden building with a roof of clay tiles and walls open on 3 sides to let in light and air. Chen made simple things: wooden bowls and spoons, cutting boards, small stools, the occasional table or shelf. Nothing fancy. Nothing decorated with elaborate carvings or inlaid with precious materials. Just honest work, functional objects made with care. His hands were calloused and scarred from years of working with tools. His fingers were stained with oil and varnish. His back ached at the end of each day from bending over the workbench. But he loved his work. He loved the smell of fresh-cut wood. He loved the feel of a plane gliding across a board, shaving off thin curls that fell to the floor like ribbons. He loved the way a piece of wood revealed its character as he worked with it, the grain, the color, the hidden knots that appeared unexpectedly. On this autumn morning, Chen arrived at his workshop just as the sun was rising. The air was cool and fresh. Mist hung in the valley, slowly burning off as the light grew stronger. He unlocked the workshop door and stepped inside. The smell of wood enveloped him immediately. Pine and cedar, oak and bamboo. Each wood had its own scent, and together they created an aroma that meant home. He lit a fire in the small stove in the corner, not for warmth yet, but to heat water for tea. While he waited for the water to boil, he walked around the workshop, running his hand over the pieces in various stages of completion. A set of bowls, sanded smooth but not yet oiled. A cutting board that needed one more round of finish. A small stool waiting for its final assembly. The water boiled. He made tea in a clay pot, letting the leaves steep while he stood at the open side of the workshop, looking out at the village. Smoke was rising from a few chimneys now. The village was waking. Soon people would be moving about, beginning their daily tasks. Chen poured tea into a simple wooden cup he had made himself. He sipped slowly, letting the warmth spread through him. The tea was bitter and good. He had no sugar, no honey, just the leaves and hot water. It was enough. When he finished, he set the cup aside and approached his workbench. Today he planned to finish the set of bowls. 5 of them, all roughly the same size, carved from a single piece of cherry wood. He had been working on them for weeks, shaping them on the lathe, sanding them by hand, getting them as smooth as river stones. He picked up the first bowl and held it to the light. The wood was beautiful, warm, red-brown with darker streaks running through it. The grain curved around the bowl in elegant lines. He ran his thumb over the inside. Still a few rough spots. He would sand those away today. He selected a piece of fine sandpaper and began to work. Slow, circular motions. The sandpaper whispered against the wood, a sound like breathing, like wind in grass. He worked without thinking, his hands knowing what to do. Sand, check, sand again, check again. The bowl slowly became smoother, softer, perfect. As he worked, his mind wandered. He thought about the tree this bowl had come from, a cherry tree that had grown somewhere in these mountains. It had stood for decades, perhaps a century. It had put down roots. It had stretched toward the sun. It had survived storms and droughts and cold winters. It had produced blossoms every spring, small pink flowers that fell like snow. It had offered shade in summer. It had been home to birds and insects. And then, for whatever reason, it had been cut down. Perhaps it had died. Perhaps it had been deemed too close to a path. Perhaps someone needed the wood. Chen didn't know the tree's story. He only had this piece of it now, transformed into bowls. But in these bowls, the tree continued. Changed, yes. No longer standing in the forest, but still here. Still beautiful, still useful. The tree had given itself, and now it would give again, holding food, holding water, holding whatever was placed within it. Chen felt a wave of gratitude for this tree he had never seen, for its years of growth, for its transformation into wood, for the fact that this particular piece had found its way to his workshop. He finished sanding the first bowl and set it aside. He picked up the second and began again. The work was repetitive, but he didn't mind. Repetition had its own beauty. Each bowl was the same, yet each was unique. The grain was different. The weight was slightly different. Each one required its own attention. The sun climbed higher. The mist burned off completely. The village came fully to life. Chen could hear the sounds of daily activity, children calling to each other, chickens clucking, the distant ring of a blacksmith's hammer. But in his workshop, time moved at its own pace, slow, steady, the rhythm of hands working with wood. By midday, he had sanded all 5 bowls. They sat in a row on the workbench, smooth and perfect. Now came the final step, oiling them. He had a mixture of linseed oil and beeswax that he used for finishing. It would seal the wood, protect it, and bring out the depth of the grain. He poured a small amount of the mixture into a cloth and began to rub it into the first bowl. The wood drank the oil thirstily. Almost immediately, the color deepened. The grain became more pronounced. The bowl seemed to glow from within. Chen worked the oil into every surface, inside and out, top to bottom. His hands moved in slow circles, pressing the oil into the wood. This was his favorite part of the process, the moment when the object revealed its final beauty. When all the hours of work paid off in this transformation. As he worked, he thought about the people who would use these bowls. He didn't know who they were. He would sell the bowls at the market, and they would go to different homes, different families. They would hold rice or soup. They would be washed and used and washed again. They would become part of people's daily lives. And in those moments, when someone lifted a bowl to eat, when they felt its smoothness, when they noticed its beauty, perhaps they would feel a small connection to the tree, to him, to the chain of hands and effort that had brought this object into being. Chen felt grateful for this connection, for the invisible threads that tied him to strangers, for the way his work went out into the world and became part of other people's lives. He finished oiling all 5 bowls and set them on a shelf to dry. They would need several hours. Tomorrow he would give them a final buffing, and then they would be complete. He cleaned his hands with a rag, wiping away the oil. His stomach reminded him he hadn't eaten since breakfast. He had some rice and vegetables wrapped in a cloth. He sat on a stool at the open side of the workshop and ate his simple lunch, watching the village. A woman walked by with a basket on her head. 2 children chased each other down the road, laughing. An old man led a water buffalo toward the fields. Ordinary moments, ordinary lives. But watching them, Chen felt connected, part of something larger. After lunch, he returned to the workbench. He still had other projects to work on, the cutting board, the stool. But first, he wanted to start something new. He had a piece of oak that had been sitting in the corner for months. He had been waiting for the right moment to work with it. Today felt like the right moment. He carried the oak board to the workbench. It was rough cut, the surfaces uneven, but he could see the potential in it. He could imagine what it might become. A tray, perhaps, or a small table. He would let the wood tell him. He ran his hand over the surface, feeling the texture. There was a knot near one end, dark and hard. Most woodworkers would cut away the knot, but Chen liked knots. They were character. They were the tree's story written in wood. He decided to make a tray, something simple but beautiful, something that would showcase the oak's grain and include the knot as a feature rather than a flaw. He marked measurements with a pencil, cut lines. Then he picked up his saw and began to cut. The saw moved through the wood with a steady rhythm, back and forth, back and forth. Sawdust fell to the floor like small golden snowflakes. The work absorbed him completely. His mind grew quiet. There was only the wood, the saw, the motion, the sound. Time disappeared. The afternoon passed without him noticing. When he finally looked up, the light had changed. It was late afternoon now. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows. The tray was taking shape. He had cut the basic form and was now planing the surfaces smooth. He worked until the light began to fade. Then he set down his tools and stood back to look at what he had done. The tray was still rough. It would need much more work, but he could see what it would become. He could feel it. He cleaned his workspace, sweeping up the sawdust and shavings. He banked the fire in the stove. He washed his hands in a bucket of water. Then he stood at the open side of the workshop and watched the sun set. The sky turned pink and orange. The mountains became silhouettes against the colored sky. Smoke rose from the village chimneys, thin white lines ascending into the dimming light. Chen felt tired. His back ached. His hands were sore. But it was a good tiredness. The tiredness of a day well spent, a day of honest work. He thought about the bowls drying on the shelf, about the tray beginning to take form, about all the pieces he had made over the years, thousands of them, probably, each one a small offering, each one a way of saying thank you. Thank you to the trees. Thank you to the people who would use his work. Thank you to his hands that could still hold tools. Thank you to his eyes that could still see the grain. Thank you to his heart that still found joy in simple things. He locked the workshop and began walking home. His house was not far, just a short walk through the village. The air was cool now. The first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. As he walked, he noticed things. The way the last light touched the mountains, the sound of crickets beginning their evening song, the smell of cooking fires, the warmth of his body after a day of work. Small things, ordinary things, but each one a gift. When he reached his house, his wife had prepared dinner. Simple food, rice and vegetables, miso soup. They ate together in comfortable silence. No need for many words. After so many years together, they communicated in glances and gestures. After dinner, Chen sat on the porch. The night was clear and cool. The sky was full of stars. He could see the Milky Way, that river of light flowing across the darkness. He thought about the day, the bowls, the tray, the work of his hands, and he felt grateful, not for anything specific, just grateful for being alive, for being able to work, for having something to offer, for being part of the great cycle of giving and receiving that made up a life. He sat there for a long time, listening to the night sounds. Crickets, the distant hoot of an owl, the rustle of wind in the trees. His wife came and sat beside him. She didn't speak, she just sat. Their shoulders touched, warm, present. Eventually, they went inside. They prepared for sleep. Chen lay down on his mat and pulled the blanket over himself. His body was tired, but his mind was at peace. He thought, "Tomorrow I will wake and return to the workshop. I will finish the tray. I will buff the bowls. I will begin something new, and it will be good." He thought, "This is enough. This work, this life, this day, it is enough." And with that thought, he closed his eyes and let sleep take him. His breathing deepened, his body relaxed, and he dreamed of wood and grain and hands shaping simple things with love. And now, as the night deepens around you, as these stories settle like falling leaves, let yourself rest. There is nothing more you need to do, nowhere you need to go. Only this moment, soft and welcoming. You have journeyed with us through mountains and villages, through temple courtyards and quiet workshops. You have seen small things reveal themselves, a plant growing in stone, a tiny radish, a mushroom by a well, the grain of wood in firelight. each one a reminder that gratitude lives in the smallest moments. Let your body sink deeper now. Let the weight of the day dissolve. Your breath continues, gentle and easy, requiring no effort at all. Perhaps you carry these stories with you into sleep. Perhaps you carry the image of Tenzin walking the mountain path, or Mei in her garden, or Brother Hui bowing to the mushroom, or Chen's hands moving over wood. Perhaps you carry only the feeling they left behind, a quietness, a warmth, a sense that everything is exactly as it should be. The mountains are still there, waiting in darkness. The stars continue their slow wheel across the sky, and you, here in this moment, are held by something larger than yourself, by the earth beneath you, by the rhythm of breath and heartbeat, by the mystery that includes everything. Rest now. Let go. Let sleep come in its own time, in its own way. There is no rush, only this gentle drifting, this soft descent into dreams. And as you go, know that you too are a gift. Your presence here, your breath, your being, all of it part of the great unfolding, all of it worthy of gratitude. Sleep well, sleep deeply. Let the darkness hold you. Let the night carry you gently into dreams where everything is beautiful and nothing is lacking, and gratitude flows like water through a peaceful valley. Good night.